At the behest of lobbyists representing global beef packers, Congress appropriated $15 million to buy millions of electronic identification, or EID, eartags that the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, will now force America's cattle producers to affix to their cattle. And let's say this another way. Global corporations just received a huge gift from Congress in the form of taxpayer dollars that will be used to force America's farmers and ranchers to help those corporations export beef. And I forgot to mention that Congress has been forcing American taxpayers to pay way more than $15 million to help these global corporations. The total amount is well over $150 million since this devious plan was first incepted. Now, some of you might think my summation is an overexaggeration, so I'll defend what I said. This started over 2 decades ago, around 2022. Back then, the global elites, including global beef packers, determined that all nations should mandate a government-run National Animal Identification System, or NAIS, or NACE, to facilitate more trade. So the global elites asked Congress to mandate one. But at that time, Congress was instead helping American farmers and ranchers and consumers by forcing the global beef packers to put labels on meat to inform consumers as to where the beef packers were sourcing their beef. In other words, Congress was working to require mandatory country of origin labeling, or MCOOL, on beef. The global beef packers didn't like this, but they wanted a government-mandated NACE even more. So they tried to convince Congress to require NACE as a condition for MCOOL, but Congress refused. And that's why the MCOOL statute still states that the Secretary of Agriculture shall not use a mandatory identification system to verify the country of origin of a covered commodity. So failing their global trade objective, the global elites changed their tactics, shifting their focus of NACE away from trade and towards animal disease traceability. And they breathed new life into NACE after BSE was detected in an imported Canadian cow. And in 2004, then Secretary of Agriculture Ann Veneman announced a framework for the implementation of the National Animal Identification System, the NACE. And for the next 6 years, the USDA and the global packers convinced Congress to appropriate a total of $148 million taxpayer dollars to force NACE upon America's cattle farmers and ranchers. But they failed. And they failed because the elitists could not demonstrate the need for such a costly system that would strip America's cattle farmers and ranchers of their freedoms and liberties. And that system would be costly. The Congressional Research Service estimated that NACE would cost the cattle industry more than $200 million each year. And it's noteworthy that America's cattle farmers and ranchers, the last bastion of independent livestock producers, refused the government's taxpayer-funded efforts to get them to capitulate to more government control. For example, in the U.S. poultry and hog industries, which are already nearly completely controlled by multinational meat packers, from egg to plate and birth to plate respectively, the producer sign-up for NACE was as high as 80% for the hogs and 95% for poultry. But it was only 18% for independent cattle producers. And so it was that the government backed off from the cattle industry and began searching for an alternative that, while it didn't appease the global beef packers' trade goal of mandating EID eartags, it did meet the needs of animal health officials who conduct disease tracebacks. Now, that alternative was finalized in 2013 in the form of a final rule that promised America's cattle farmers and ranchers that they would not need to register their properties or premises with the government, and they could choose among various forms of animal identification. In other words, they could choose to register their premises with the government and use electronic identification eartags, or they could choose not to register their premises with the government and use non-electronic identification eartags. And here's what the USDA said about how this non-electronic identification mandate would impact the nation's animal health officials. The USDA said this: "Our new approach to animal disease traceability provides a flexible solution that is endorsed by the animal health officials who conduct disease control programs." And now we've all learned that we can't trust our government, because it's now back to helping the global beef packers get what they wanted all along: mandatory EID. And here's what the USDA says is the greatest benefit to their gift of a mandatory EID to the global beef packers. Here's what USDA said: "The most significant benefit of the rule is to maintain foreign markets. And oh, by the way, only 11% of the beef produced in the U.S. is exported. So thank you, Congress, for helping the global beef packers at the expense of about 90% of America's cattle farmers and ranchers. Well, I'm Bill Bullard with RTAF USA, the voice of the independent cattle producer in the United States of America. Have a productive week. Thank you, and goodbye.